Thank you for joining us and welcome. After a long acquaintance with garden plants, I wanted, as a landscape architect and garden designer who specializes in working with perennial plants in New England, to develop a tool, a versatile tool, to bring the exciting power of creating a garden into your own hands. The ColorBlock Garden Design Cards are designed for you to bring a garden to life on your very own tabletop. With their customability and realistic photo images, you can literally see what your choices for the garden will look like. As an oil painter too of landscapes and portraits, I've applied my artist skill in assembling colors that work well together in the garden. Pastels for spring, jewel tones for fall, for example. Each card is color boxed with squares of color companions for plant ideas. But the final choices are up to you, as this is your garden, custom tailored by you. You can use the guidance offered, or you can have a flagrant crossing of the rules. Each of you will have unique ideas. Your package includes 150 sturdy, glossy, business-sized cards of 50 hardy New England perennials for zones 3 to 8. These plants have been selected by me after years of research and testing in my own garden, and I'm giving you plants that I prefer to use for their reliability and ease of maintenance. We have plants for sun, shade, and part shade, and there are 3 cards of each plant with easy to follow instructions so that you can begin the game of making your own unique garden right now on your tabletop. Let's begin the process. There are a few basic principles to use for your design cards. The first thing that you want to decide is the evaluation of where you're putting this garden. Are you just doing it for fun, in which case you can imagine the type of garden you might like someday? Or do you have a specific spot on your property that you'd like to design your garden for? Note the hours of full sun exposure. Full sun, in terms of traditionally in the field of garden design and landscape architecture, means 6+ hours of sun a day. And we're in New England. If we were in a southern climate, it may be fewer hours. But here in New England, we like to have 6 hours of sun in order to call it full sun. The next step is part shade, which is 4 to 6 hours of sun. It's also called part sun, with emphasis perhaps on being a little more sun, but I just simplified this for the process of the cards and call it part shade. So fewer than 4 hours of direct light is what we call shade. So obviously there's a spectrum of light, and that is part of your experience with getting to know your own property. So after that, you look at what kind of soil are you thinking of. And the first thing that affects soil, besides the inherent texture of the soil, is the slope of the land. So when we talk about positive slope, we're talking about land that is draining away. So a plant here at the top of the slope is going to require better drained soil than a plant down here. So even if both of these plants are in part shade, the plant at the bottom of the slope is more likely to be happier if it's a wet soil plant at the bottom of the slope. And up here, the plant can deal with a lot of sun exposure and less moisture. So this is called a positive slope. So think about the slope of your area because it's important. The next thing we want to think about is measure the space. So one of the things that's very useful about the cards in terms of your tabletop is that you can literally space the cards further apart to make up for greater space. Each card also shows you the width and the height. So this is a plant I'm going to be using, and I'll show you how to use it in a few moments, but it's the cut leaf coneflower, or Rudbeckia laciniata is its botanical name. So on these cards are featured both the common name and the botanical name. And the reason the botanical name is important is because that's the key identifier of the plant. There are often several confusing common names for a plant. So if you want to get what you really want, you should always check to see that the botanical or scientific name matches what you are looking for. So in terms of these cards, the first thing that I note is the position in the garden. So this is the back. And in addition to the back of the garden, to simplify, I just created front, middle, back. But if you want to know specifically the height, I also give you the height. This plant, for example, has a high range, depending really on the soil conditions or even the conditions of a given season. So this is 4 to 9 feet height by 3 to 4 feet wide. So if I were to compare the width of this plant with a smaller plant that we're going to be using called Short and Sassy, which will be in the front of the garden, you'll see that this is 12 to 18 inches tall and only 18 inches wide. So we're going to position these plants more tightly together when we configure our garden. So these garden cards are versatile for being able to emulate the size of your space. So back to what I was discussing in terms of first steps, you want to know the size of your garden. Not only the width, but also the depth. The other idea that I want to explain is that now we're getting also to the concept of these cards that are featured in its name, which is the ColorBlockGardenDesignCards. Each card shows compatible colors that I have found that work well together in the garden and as a guide. You do not have to marry this next to a plant of a similar key, but often these colors work really well together. For example, here I have the cut leaf coneflower, and this marries well with a yellow, and this also marries well with orange, and those cards relate to each other. Also, generally speaking, when you arrange colors, jewel tone colors look well together, and pastel colors look well together. For example, I've put on the insert, if I were to compare the width of this plant with a smaller plant that we're going to be using called Short and Sassy, which will be in the front of the garden, you'll see that this is 12 to 18 inches tall and only 18 inches wide. So we're going to position these plants more tightly together when we configure our garden. So these garden cards are versatile for being able to emulate the size of your space. So back to what I was discussing in terms of first steps, you want to know the size of your garden. Not only the width, but also the depth. The other idea that I want to explain is that now we're getting also to the concept of these cards that are featured in its name, which is the ColorBlockGardenDesignCards. Each card shows compatible colors that I have found that work well together in the garden and as a guide. You do not have to marry this next to a plant of a similar key, but often these colors work really well together. Lois Young has offered to cover and share with us desires for a garden.
Great. So as you know, Elizabeth, I have ideas that are shady, and so I'm looking for...
Laughing because we also have problems with deer.
We have problems with deer.
Yes.
Problems with drainage in certain areas. I have a really big space of shady area that I would love to design there. And I do like green, and I'd like a pop of color somewhere, if that's possible.
Of course it is. So
all right.
Let's get started. Some of the more shade plants are off to your right. To emphasize that this is your process, not mine. Mm-hmm. So please go ahead and choose plants that appeal to you, and we can talk further once
Okay.
once your garden plants are chosen, and then we can get into the niceties of, for example, how long a strip of your property you want to include these plant cards to be in, etc.
Okay, so I really do like ferns, and I was at the botanical garden in Maine a few weeks ago, and they had beautiful, beautiful tall ferns, so I would love to have some of that.
Excellent.
There's also various, I see that you have various things where these ones here, the European ginger seems to be very glossy, and I don't know, they just seem to attract light, and that seems important to me.
Perfect.
Of course, I said at the beginning that I wanted color, and I know you've been trying to get me to get Lenten rose in my gardens for a long time, so here's my opportunity. I'd like to add those in. And how many would you suggest? How many different
Well,
plants?
how big an area would you want to consider? We can repeat masses of these plants, but we can, I think for the purposes of this exercise, why don't you keep going, and then we can discard some plants if they don't fit into our basic framework.
All right. The other thing too is the phlox. Those are very pretty. I've seen those on the side of the road, and they just seem to fill in areas very nicely, and I think that that's important as well. I do have a lot of yellow already in my yard, and I notice that you have quite a bit of yellow here that are good for shade. Oh, irises. I see irises here. You know I love
Yes.
irises. Okay, so let's put those in there as well. I don't know.
Those are good
but
for the more part sun spectrum of your
Okay.
shade garden, but they will do well in part sun.
Okay.
And then also other plants just to consider, because they're not strictly over to the right there, but if you wanted to move from yellows to pinks, for example, the
Okay.
bleeding heart or the foxglove might
Let's go
work.
with let's try the bleeding heart.
Okay.
I think I really do like those, and I've seen those around, and I really do like them. So now when I'm looking at this, I'm not really sure that the colors that I've chosen really go well for the color wheel that you were explaining earlier.
Okay, well
so I'm not
let's
sure.
test them out. So green can work with pastel and with the more jewel tone colors. I think that you are actually what I would call mid-hue colors.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a rich pink. It's not as deep as a magenta, but it's stronger than a pastel, and I think it would marry well in terms
With
of
the yellow.
hues with the yellow of the yellow
Okay.
Siberian iris.
Yeah.
So I think that would work very well together, and if you want to test some of the color block method, let's go ahead. So the May Breeze is a lavender, and that is work together because they cross-reference each other. So this lavender works with yellow and vice versa. This yellow suggests a lavender. It's not always going to be duplicated in terms of the cross-referencing, but here it is. And so I say, as a color check, yes. Now this Lenten rose, just to be very garden designy here, with the yellow, from the yellow stamens, that's an amazing look together. So the color of the flower actually references each other. And this is something you'd only see if you actually saw a photorealistic image. So also showing are the shapes of the flowers, so you can see that you're going to have an interesting shaped garden because you have the vase-shaped ostrich fern, the low-growing ground cover of the European ginger, which is round. You have the arching bleeding heart, and you have the more spread form of the May Breeze Canadian phlox, which is nice because I know you're from Canada. So I think that's a nice thing to have a plant that is named for your homeland.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to arrange the cards that we chose a little moment ago. So I really do like the ferns, and they're 4 feet, so per what you were saying, they should go in the back, and they should be 2 feet, approximately 2 feet apart. I really, really like the bleeding hearts. It really does bring a different color to my garden. As I mentioned before, I do have a lot of yellow, so it's good to introduce a different color. And this is 3 feet apart, so I guess these will be a little closer together. And I really do like these shiny ones, but before I go here, I'm wondering if we should look at the white ones. I had noticed these before, and so these are the Honorine Jobert.
Very good.
Anemone?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
One of my favorite.
So I like these because they also have yellow, and they'll bring the yellow into my garden. So these again are 4 feet tall by 2 feet, so perhaps they should be even behind the pink ones. Is that how we would do this?
Yes, or you could have them on the same reference line. So
Okay,
behind
alright.
the pink is good, but it could be the same reference line with the ostrich fern.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, and you can use also multiples of the plants, or you could use, for example, you want to have maybe 2 Honorine Jobert and 3 ostrich, up to you, or you can use 3 of each,
Okay.
or you can have a stand-in card.
Okay. All right, great. So I like that. I like this combination a lot. And then we have the European ginger, and this is 6 inches tall, so this is definitely right in the front. So that would be like a border.
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes,
envisioning?
that
Okay.
works well along
Okay.
pathways, for example.
And if I still wanted to bring the yellows in here, the irises, how would I bring these in? I'm wondering.
Those
So
would work
2 to
also
3
where you have a
feet.
little more sun in the garden at the edge
Yeah.
that may be
Okay.
next to the sun.
Okay.
But the
So I could
same
come
middle, but they could basically be on the similar plane with the bleeding heart.
Okay.
Or you
Yeah.
could have some
I could
right up in
interspace
front.
them maybe in between?
Yes,
Does that make
sure,
sense?
sure.
Okay.
You can mass them or interspace them. This is your garden.
All right. Then voila. This is what I come up with, and I love it. As you know, I love the ferns, so as ferns in my garden, I'm happy, but I love to bring the color in there as well. So, yeah. All right,
Okay.
so I'm happy with what we came up with. I noticed that some of the ones that I was excited about at the beginning, I sort of discarded for the time being, and came up with this wonderful display of color, which I'm really excited to see in my garden in person, so.
Well, I'm
Thanks for your
very
help.
happy for, oh, thank you, Lois. I'm happy for you, and I just want to say, you just designed this garden. I don't think I mentioned a thing. I really think this is your garden. It's a unique garden. No one else has this garden, but you're going to have something you custom designed.
Yeah.
So I'm
and it's
excited
really-
for you.
And what I really like is to be able to visually see the various choices available, and that's really important in designing the garden. So thanks for coming up with such a great product.
Thank you. Thanks for coming over.